Alrighty, guys, welcome back to the newest episode of Ball Don't Lie. We've got a bit of an MLB trade deadline special. Not going to be, we're not going to solely talk about MLB, but this is being recorded later that night, so all the moves have gone through. And JP, it's been an eventful one to say the least.
Yeah, I think people were really kind of Otani or bust with this trade deadline. Everyone was like, well, where's he going to go? And everyone was kind of holding their breaths, even teams were. And when the Angels were like, well, we're not trading him. And then they not only said that, but they made moves to compound their postseason push. It really kind of let the floodgates open, and some crazy stuff has happened, not just today, but the last couple days as well.
Definitely, it's been an interesting one. We've seen the use of the player option today as well, with Eduardo Rodriguez backing out of his seemingly done deal to the Dodgers to stay with the Tigers. Um, that was an interesting moment, but yeah, it has been eventful. So JP, go ahead and start us off. Give me one of your favorite trade deadline happenings, if you will.
I really like the Arizona Diamondbacks going out and getting Paul Sewald. He was a great closer with Seattle, and one of the biggest things that I think a lot of people have question marks about the Diamondbacks down the stretch is their back into the bullpen high leverage guys. I mean, I like Miguel Castro, but when Miguel Castro is your best high leverage relief arm, people aren't going to be too high on your abilities when the going gets tough in October against some of those high powered lineups you're going to face in the wild card series and the NLDS. So I really like the Diamondbacks going out there and solidifying their bullpen with a high level arm like that. Interesting move by the Mariners because they've been playing a lot better as of late, and they kind of sold off some guys, but they held on to some pieces. So just kind of interesting there.
Yeah, I do agree with you that Paul Sewald's a great acquisition for the Diamondbacks, but also the Mariners, it is kind of a question mark as to what their intentions are. Because as you mentioned, they didn't, fully commit to selling, but you feel like they were kind of in a position to at least compete for a wild card spot.
Yeah, like they were listening in on offers for Teoscar Hernandez and Logan Gilbert, and they ended up shipping off guys like AJ Pollock. They DFA'd Colton Wong and Paul Sewald. Their big arm in the bullpen now. Of course, they do have Andres Munoz, who can throw like
Mm.
100, like it's nothing to kind of slot into that closer position. So, I like what the Diamondbacks got back or I like what the Mariners got back in return for some of those guys. And AJ Pollock hasn't been great this year. But Spencer, what's one of your favorite trades?
I feel like as a Cubs fan, I have to talk about the acquisition of Jaime Candelario. Originally he already has played for the Cubs in the past, but he was having almost kind of a resurgence or a breakout year, if you will, for the Nationals this season, and kind of breaking out as one of their better players on a team that's they're definitely committing to or had committed to selling in previous years. But they will, I mean, that's kind of how it goes in the MLB. You commit to selling and eventually you build back up that talent and
I think they've done
become
a
good
really good
again.
job
But
of that.
absolutely, they got an absolute haul for Juan Soto, and Candelario is one of those guys that stood out. So that's why I was so happy when the Cubs made a move because they were on a 8-game win streak. Of course, the last 2 nights, the only 2 games I've watched or been able to watch, they've lost both. So I think I may be a curse, but we gave up 2 minor league guys who were both eligible for the Rule 5 draft after this season and could have been claimed by other teams. So I thought it was a great move. We lost and neither one of them were above the double A level. So really it was kind of a let's get rid of these 2 prospects that we could eventually lose anyway for a guy that can help us right now. And the Cubs are definitely going to be looking to not only break into the wild card race, but that division race is getting pretty close with them in Cincinnati in the midst of a 4-game series right now.
Yeah, and the Brewers there as well. The Brewers made some interesting moves on the deadline, acquiring outfielder Mark Canha from the New York Mets, who shockingly seem not very interested in competing for at least this year. Obviously, I mean, they're 5 games and 500. They've been underperforming, but some interesting news. Whether that is actually founded in reality, well, I guess only time will tell about future plans for the Mets. They also went out and got Andrew Chafin from the Arizona Diamondbacks, more commonly known as Kenny Powers. Um, but I really like that move. But my second favorite move of the deadline has to be the Miami Marlins going out and getting first baseman Jake Berger from the Chicago White Sox. A ton of team control with him for a long time to come. He's hit 25 home runs this season, third most in the American League, and he's going to a Marlins team that really kind of desperately needs that power because they have the guys who hit for high average like Luis Arias. I mean, they have guys that hit for power like Jorge Soler, but he gives them a solid option behind him as well. And it's gonna you need a big power bat like that to win in October. And Sandy Alcantara has really kind of turned the corner for them. He had a really tough start to the year, but he's been doing really well as of late. And the Marlins looking to push for their first postseason appearance since 2020, and their second since they won the World Series in 2003. So it's really just going to be a fun race to the end. I think the Marlins did themselves a big favor at this deadline with some of the guys they got. They also picked up Josh Bell from Cleveland, who's struggled, but we know what he's capable of, especially down the stretch.
And having a guy like that, as you mentioned, the Marlins only one game out of the wild card race right now, but having a guy like Josh Bell to, bring in against righties as pinch hitter in the postseason, and with that power he possesses, you never know what a guy like that can do. So I like that move as well. But when you mentioned Andrew Chafin, I love that move personally. I was hoping the Cubs would reach back out to him because we don't really have any left-handed bullpen relief that much. So I was hoping we'd sign a lefty relief pitcher. Didn't happen, but I can't be too mad. But another move that I'm a big fan of was the Phillies going out and get Michael Lorenzen. I
Yeah.
thought that was a really nice move. They're currently have the highest wild card seed right now, and it doesn't look like they're going to catch up to the Braves as of right now, barring a collapse of your
Of
favorite team. I wouldn't
2011
wish that upon you.
performance for proportions, that year
Yeah,
will forever live in infamy. But yeah, no, the Phillies, that's what they needed, and I really
yeah.
like Lorenzen's like what. I didn't mean to kind of jump in front of you there.
No, no,
Continue
go.
on with what you think about the Michael Lorenzen trade for the Titans.
I mean, I just thought it was a great move because this is a team that went to the World Series last year, and I wouldn't even say they're underperforming. They definitely didn't start well, but 9 games over 500. As I mentioned, they're currently leading the wild card race, and kind of finding their stride. With Bryce Harper, they didn't start very well. With him starting out the season injured, but I mean, this is a team that you kind of once you're into the playoffs you're wondering what they're gonna reach after we saw them last year kind of overperform, making it all the way to the World Series and being very competitive with the Astros, who looked far and away as the best team in the American League side of things. So I think going out and getting a really solid starting pitcher in Lorenzen is only going to help them. It makes them deeper for their hopeful playoff runs for Philly fans. But I think it's just a great move, and they only gave up. I mean, it was of course, a highly touted prospect, but they only gave up one prospect for it. So
Yeah, and I think that the one of the biggest issues, other than Trey Turner and JT Realmuto really heavily underperforming so far this year, not just from the plate but defensively as well. But the Phillies have really needed depth in the rotation, and Lorenzen can really slot in as a nice three behind Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler. And I mean, then you have Taijuan Walker, who's been a pretty solid pitcher this year as your four, and that can really play well. And help make some of those postseason games like you want to make it a 3 or 2 inning game with your starters going 6 or 7 innings in October. You just need your bullpen to cover a couple outs. So I think the Phillies really did something big there because that's going to help them get cushion as we kind of transition to just looking at the standings and talking about kind of the picture as a whole in the National League. Only 1.5 games separates the top wild card spot from being the second team out. Right now, the Phillies and the Giants are tied there, but the Phillies have the edge in the tiebreakers, and then the third wild card spot is the Milwaukee Brewers, who are right there in the thick of that NL Central race. Half a game behind the Brewers are the Arizona Diamondbacks, who are still right there with the Los Angeles Dodgers in the NL West. And you have the Miami Marlins, 1 game back. They had a disastrous stretch there in July where they lost, I believe, 8 or 9 games in a row, and really kind of tanked their spots, but they're still right there in it. And then the Cubs, who are red hot and have a big lead tonight over the first place Cincinnati Reds, sit there at 4 games back, with the Mets and the Padres both kind of lurking behind the Cubs.
Yeah, the NL wildcard race is, as you mentioned, 5 teams within 1.5 games of each other, and the Cubs, surging. It's really going to come down to the wires. What it feels like is all of those teams were involved in the free agent moves, or excuse me, the trade deadline moves, not free agent. But they're trying to make their team better and make that final push for the playoffs. And a lot of those divisions are close to really all the divisions except for the NL East. A lot of those wild card teams can just, slot in and out. But yeah, the Braves are firmly looking like one of
Yeah,
the best teams in baseball, if not the best.
yeah, they currently
But
sit 31 games over 500, and really didn't make a ton of moves, but the ones they did, people really like. They got Nicky Lopez from the Kansas City Royals, one of the best defensive left fielders in baseball. And then they went out and they got Brad Hand from the Colorado Rockies, playing for his ninth team in 2 years, it feels like. But he's a really good reliever. He was awesome for the Phils as they went to the World Series last year, and has pitched in core, so his ERA is a little rough, but his FIP, his strikeout numbers, and he's allowing a sub 500 OPS on the season to left-handed batters. So he's a really good lefty on lefty pitcher, and that's going to be a huge weapon for the Braves. Because the one thing about the Braves is just dealing with the health. They've lost Nick Anderson for a while in the bullpen. They just got AJ Minter back, but they also don't have Dylan Lee and Jesse Chavez for a little bit. And so even if Brad Hand isn't some lights out great guy down like in the later innings, he can give you these innings in the regular season to kind of help save the arms, which is what the Braves really did in 2021 when they traded for Richard Rodriguez from the Pittsburgh Pirates. He was good, but what he was really great at was it allowed Tyler Matzik and Luke Jackson and Will Smith to have fully rested arms going into the October month. And we saw what the night shift was able to do for the Braves then. We'll see if a revamped and retooled one can lead the Braves to another world championship.
also, as you mentioned, just being able to pitch those innings, even if it's an inning, on one night, so another one of your relievers doesn't have to go 2 innings. Doing anything to just stay healthy and stay fresh in the postseason, it's crucial. And I thought that was a great signing for the Braves.
And then looking over at the American League, listen to these divisional leaders: Baltimore Orioles in the East, Minnesota Twins in the Central, and the Texas Rangers in the West. Like this is like 2013 or something. Really fun baseball happening in the American League. The wild card, it's kind of who you thought some of the top teams would be. You got Tampa Bay, and they are solidly ahead in that first wild card spot, right there, thick and thin with the Orioles for the AL East lead. The Houston Astros, who are kind of right there with the Rangers as well, they are 4.5 games back of Tampa Bay, and Houston is 1.5 up on the Toronto Blue Jays, with the Boston Red Sox sitting 2 games back, Mariners 3, Angels 3, and the Yankees 3.5 games back of Toronto for that third wild card spot. So some inaction that has kind of caused an uproar either way, because the Yankees, they didn't sell, they didn't buy. They have the best bullpen in baseball, and the only trades they made were adding 2 relievers. They didn't add a starter. Their starters have really struggled outside of Garrett Cole. They didn't add any kind of bat. They have one of the worst offenses in all of Major League Baseball, even with Aaron Judge coming back and Giancarlo Stanton looking a little better. I mean, just this could really be kind of a disastrous season. I mean, they need to kind of go on a tear to even look like they might make the postseason. And so, it's just kind of a lack of direction, I think, which has gotten a lot of Yankees fans and baseball fans in general just kind of confused as to what's going on.
Yeah, unfortunately, JP, I can't shed any light on the situation because I also have no idea what's going on. It really doesn't make much sense, what they're doing. Yeah, I don't know how you can have a roster with, of course, it feels like they catch the injury bug every year, but with the amount of money that they have and people that they can, ship off, and being the New York Yankees is can never be overlooked.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I don't know how you sit there, you're 55 and 52, 3.5 games out of the wild card, and let me just make sure, last in the AL East right now, and doing like just doing nothing to help yourself. I mean, they're right in the mix, but if you don't do anything to kind of get over that edge, you're just gonna not make the postseason. And having one of the more talented rosters in baseball, it's kind of sad, and I can only
Facing
imagine,
a Cy
you know,
Young season of
yeah,
Garrett Cole as well. And
yeah,
so, on the flip side, in the AL East, almost every other team made a big move. The Orioles went out and got Jack Flaherty from the St. Louis Cardinals. The
hmm
Rays got Aaron Savale from the Cleveland Guardians. And Toronto went out and got Paul O'Neill, not Paul O'Neill, Paul DeYoung at
Paul
short.
DeYoung, yeah.
Sorry, we were just thinking about Yankees so hard, and it started. I read Joe Torre's book recently, so I was just kind of my mind rests on the 2000s. But the AL East just it only got stronger. I mean, the Red Sox made some moves in kind of reshaping their roster. And the Yankees just really stood pat. In terms of the Central, the Twins didn't really do much. I guess their offense isn't great, but their pitching is really, really good. So I guess they're just kind of hoping they can make it with that and then get hot. The Guardians picked up Noah Syndergaard, which would have been a great move if it was 2015. But in terms of
And
the
of course,
yeah,
I was gonna say, sorry to interrupt you real quick. He goes, what, 5 and a third, and only gave up 1 run yesterday, and then, of course, takes a line drive off the leg and has to leave the
yeah,
game.
just
His first start
I
looks
cannot catch a break.
so
And then
sad.
on the south side of Chicago, opposite of your Cubbies, the disastrous White Sox kind of shockingly stood pat. They traded Lucas Giolito, but they hung on to Tim Anderson and Luis Robert and Dylan Cease, Gregory Soto and Liam Hendricks, some of their big guys. So I guess they were looking to just kind of run it back and compete next year. But in the West, you had a bunch of teams that made a bunch of moves. What do you think was the most interesting? I mean, obviously, with the Rangers and the Astros, they got a little older in their rotations, but what did you think about the Rangers going out and getting Scherzer and then the Astros reuniting with Verlander?
I mean, the Rangers going out and getting Scherzer, it kind of that was one of, I would say, as the deadline was ending, that was one of the first big moves that was being, widely reported. And it was like, it seemed like you just snapped your fingers and it was done.
Yeah,
They went out and they just immediately got him from New York. And I think it's a good move. You shore up the rotation, and the Rangers, they're cementing that right now is their time.
yeah.
I
I
mean,
really like
if
seeing them
this
go
is
after
not
like
evident,
this. Now they did give
yes.
up Luis Angel Acuna, Ronald Acuna's little brother, but I think the biggest concerns because this is a very high risk, high reward move. I think because Scherzer has kind of floundered down the stretch for the Dodgers and the Mets in September and October the last 2 years, and this year he just hasn't been that good, especially with his slider. His locations have been pretty putrid with that. So I think they're really banking on being able to kind of rehab him and fix what's been wrong with him mechanically this year. And if they're able to do that, then you have Nathan Eovaldi and Max Scherzer in the postseason as a 1-2 punch, which is just absolutely insane. But if it doesn't work, a pitching staff that is, a little battered. I mean, Evaldi just went on the IL for a little bit, and
Mhm.
starters that don't really go all that deep with a not very deep bullpen. The Rangers are going to try and win a lot of postseason games, like 8-5, if this Scherzer move doesn't work out. Then there's the more sure thing over there in H Town with Justin Verlander. The Houston Astros giving up their number one prospect.
I thought that was incredibly interesting. I think if you're a Mets fan, I feel like, as sad as you might have been the first 110 games of the season, you are grinning from ear to ear after
Yeah,
the last 3
I think
days.
so too. I mean, they've gotten a ton of great prospects, even when they traded
Ton.
David Robertson, their closer, to the Miami Marlins. Another move the Marlins made that I liked a lot. They got some
Mhm.
decent prospects there, and then it only got better after that, picking up a lot of top 100 guys to add to a team that's not afraid to spend. it's kind of a weak free agent market outside of Otani this winter, but they're setting themselves up to just truly become a juggernaut.
They sure are, and, it's not always the route we've seen the Astros take. Usually, developing guys out of their farm system has proved, of course, obviously valuable. They've won countless World Series in the last decade, but I mean, I think this is an interesting move for them. I was gonna touch on it on Scherzer as well. I I'm interested to see how both of those guys pitch being away from the Mets, because obviously that whole situation
Yeah, it
did
was
not go to
rough.
plan
It was such a
at
rough
all.
season. It started to bleed from kind of the record book onto the field for them. They just couldn't really get out of their own way. I mean, the Mets have a good defense, but I especially think the defense in Texas is going to help out Scherzer a lot especially if he misses on some of his locations and the ball leaves very fast. But I mean, the Astros defense speaks for itself. But Verlander's going in there with Framber Valdez and all those guys that I mean, the Astros are just. This is going to be a heavyweight bout down the stretch for the AL West pennant, and I can't be more excited to see it. But kind of wrapping up baseball here before we touch on some Gamecock recruiting and football news. The Los Angeles Angels. What do you think about not trading Otani?
I think it's very, very, very interesting because if it were me, I saw so many potential trades, right? I'm sure you did as well.
God,
It
yeah,
was every team in the league had a potential trade to get Shohei Otani, and each one was more monumental than the last. And if I were the Angels, I think I probably would have traded them. And I know that's like it's like trading. It'd be like trading prime LeBron. It's literally. I heard something that it's like it'd probably be the biggest trade in the history of the four major sports.
oh
I
yeah,
mean, it is. Like he's so one of a kind. It's impossible to.
really quantify.
It's just insane. Yeah, I have like I'm speechless. I'm stuttering like an idiot over here because I don't know like how to say like how massive that trade would have been. But I think for the Angels, if they don't make the playoffs, even if they do make the playoffs, there's no guarantee that he'll stay.
Yeah, I mean,
None.
but I think that you just at least have to try. And I think they did a good job.
Yeah.
They got Randall Grichuk, who's had a great season for the Rockies, and CJ Crone, who's uh, always been a very reliable bat. And shoring up your offense like that, while Mike Trout and Brandon Drury and Gio Urshela are hurt, and then you went out and you got another starting pitcher in Lucas Giolito, who has been fine this year, but you need fine. So I like this. It's kind of a weaker like wild card race. I mean, I feel like that the Angels could definitely push up on any of these teams towards the bottom at least, like the Red Sox and the Mariners and the Blue Jays. But that third wild card, I think it's worth it. I think you got, maybe you won't resign him, but you at least try. It took you this long to try, at least.
I will agree that, if they decided on keeping him, I think they make great moves. I think, there's no doubt about that. As you mentioned, only 3 games back. So I like where you're coming from, that you've kinda gotta try. I just wish they'd done, you can't turn back time, but I wish they'd done more in the previous years to kinda build more of a foundation instead of, like, it's kinda like they woke up and was like, "Oh crap, we gotta do something now," and they
It's like
made
you
all these
forgot something was
moves.
due, and then you're like, "Oh my god!" Like, and
They
you start
procrastinated.
actually enjoying working on it, and you're like, "Man, I wish
Yeah.
I started this sooner so I could have done like a better job." But
They procrastinated the best baseball player in the MLB's, waning days possibly in their organization,
yeah,
which it and if I hope it works because poor Mike Trout, wouldn't you just love to see him in the postseason one time?
one more time,
It's
man. I mean, they got swept by the Royals when they went on and won the World Series, and it was just like, okay, he'll be back, and he hasn't been back. But here, real quick, towards the end, Spencer, South Carolina football got a really great kind of news this afternoon. Why don't you fill us in?
it'd be an honor. 5-star Dylan Stewart from the DMV area, an area that Shane Beamer is absolutely
He's a
claiming
good time.
stake in. He might as well run for president with how much time he spends in the DC area. But five-star recruit defensive end Dylan Stewart committed to the Gamecocks this afternoon over the Ohio State Buckeyes. And, that's not, I don't know that a lot of people expect that at least a lot of people that weren't like paying attention to it. I heard from a lot of sources. I try and stay at least up to date with it, that they weren't surprised that Dylan Stewart committed to us. But just if you knew nothing about football and saw that a five-star recruit chose South Carolina over Ohio State, and it wasn't the first time in the last 6 months that's happened, and from the same area, I mean,
Yeah.
what's Shane cooking?
Yeah, well, I honestly think a lot of those relationships in that area have come from all the time he spent with his dad at Virginia Tech. I mean, he was obviously the legendary Frank Beamer and that program, and he was with them there for a very long time. And it's that, and I think the advancements that South Carolina not just football, but the athletics in general have been able to do on the NIL side of things. I think that's a huge selling point to recruits, and you're going to see that because I think that and all that wrapped into one with the kind of social media aspect on as the cherry on top because as we've seen South Carolina's football media is just one of the best in the country and you really get to get kind of a platform to show off not just how good you are but just everything about you and I think that says a lot to the program they've built and are continuing to build and man, we've hit August. I'm very excited for football to be here. I'm just chomping at the bit. Spencer, I don't know about you.
Oh, it's coming up, man, and it's gonna be incredible. But as you mentioned, the social media aspect, if you didn't see it, the Gamecocks soprano intro, uh, phenomenal. I mean, the media team is always great. But one thing I seem to have noticed, I think it's hard not to notice about South Carolina football, especially, is they always seem like they're having fun. And I feel like that's something that goes overlooked, but it's one of the most important things in baseball. I mean, if you're not that's what you start playing sports for. You don't start playing, for any other rhyme or reason, or you don't keep playing. I mean, you play because you love the game. And everyone at South Carolina, at least the people have stayed, have truly bought into that. And I think Shane Beamer has done a phenomenal job of kind of spreading that mantra. I mean, and of course being competitive at the same time. But it's a very hot program right now.
Yeah, and like, hey, that first week in Charlotte against UNC, I'm incredibly excited. But I think that's going to do it for us. Another episode of Ball Don't Lie, kind of off-season edition. Hitting the film room still, getting ready for fall camp, if you will. But we'll probably get back to y'all for at least one more episode before we're officially back in the Kennedy Greenhouse studio that you all know and love. But kind of keep an eye out for that. And me and Spencer for SUTV. This has been Ball Don't Lie. Keep it classy, folks.